The cliche captures our responses pretty well. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Life seems to be set up in such a way that we're expected to learn from our experiences of being hurt, to learn defenses and strategies to prevent hurt from occurring in the same way at the hands of the same person more than one time. And if we don't learn so that we are hurt repeatedly, then we become one of those people politely described as having issues, probably needing therapy to figure out why we, again and again, aren't learning to defend ourselves. Even worse, the person who is repeatedly hurt in the same way or by the same person begins to take on the aura of a victim, somebody we view with pity, perhaps are even tempted sometimes to blame for their own pain. We make that judgment again because life does seem to be set up in such a way that we're expected to take an experience of hurt and come away with the ability to avoid that hurt ever after. Hurt me once, shame on you. Hurt me twice, shame on me. It's a harsh pattern. This pattern that insists I quickly master skills of assessing a threat to my well-being and summoning up the ability to successfully defend myself against those threats. But this seems the way life works, especially from an evolutionary perspective, so that the quick learners, the skilled defenders, are the ones who survive and flourish. Those of us who keep getting hit over the head lag further and further behind, lose the respect of others, probably lose respect for ourselves in the process, and ultimately may not survive. During the month of November, our services are taking up the theme of covenant, the promises that people make between themselves in a community, in a congregation, that tell how they will be in relationship with one another. Any covenant worth having will also include in all those promises what to expect from one another when things go sideways and the covenant is broken. Because the thing about covenants is that they always, always, always get broken, often repeatedly. And while sometimes we may conclude that once it's broken, that's it, the relationship is over, a true covenant where the people who've made those promises care deeply about one another will be repaired. Our own covenant in this congregation says we promise to seek constructive resolutions if conflicts arise, since conflicts are almost always the venues where a covenant gets broken, and the resolution we seek will be pursued, as our covenant tells us it would be, through love, forgiveness, even making amends. But the curious thing about our covenant is its use of the word if conflicts arise, because there is no if about it. You bring people together in a community like this one, where expectations are staggeringly high, where people hope for trust, sometimes risk being vulnerable, where ideals are put before us all the time to pursue, and you will, of course, have conflicts. And of course, the covenant will fracture. That's the norm, which is why many congregations have eliminated that word if and replaced it with when. We are all of us, all our lives, imperfect, and that means we will, often repeatedly, break the promises we make to each other, sometimes quite deliberately, sometimes quite innocently. So the question becomes not so much how well we keep our covenant here or the covenants we have in other parts of our lives, but what we do when all those promises of how we're going to be in relationship with one another get broken. This coming week, when we gather for the Thanksgiving holiday and in the following weeks where there are more gatherings than usual in our lives, sometimes including people we love and care enough to keep our promises with, and sometimes including people we cannot stand, where promises were long ago broken and repairs, forgiveness, making amends are all still waiting. For some ruptures, words alone will suffice. But for the deep wounds that reach all the way into our own souls, that probably tarnish the soul of the wrongdoer along with the soul of the person wronged, those additional steps of forgiveness, even atonement, may be necessary. Relationships and covenants do not mend with just good wishes and polite tolerance. Hard enough, the work of mending a relationship or a covenant when everybody involved really intends for healing to happen so that all are participating wholeheartedly. But what happens when the desire is one-sided? Perhaps I no longer want any relationship with you, and if you're seeking to work out our conflict and I rebuff your efforts, what then are your possibilities for being healed? How can you mend things if I'm not willing to be part of the process? Or even harder, what do I do when the person who hurt me never acknowledges the wrongdoing, never apologizes, refuses to take any responsibility for what occurred, and maybe even interprets the experience in a way that I was the one who did something wrong? How do I move on? How do I ever heal? How is a covenant ever put back together when the one who broke it is indifferent? Does the break just remain there ever after, kind of like a tear in the fabric of our lives, leaving me with no option other than ignoring it or carrying the anger with it, bumping into it whenever I try to trust a bit more, limited by it whenever I try to love a bit more deeply? We know too well that our world is filled with the unapologetic, the indifferent, the self-centered, those who shed blame and responsibility again and again. And we know too well that our lives do contain others who for complicated reasons seem unwilling or unable to make amends when they disappoint us, who never quite grasp the hurt they caused, even when we explain it, who avoid difficult conversations and self-scrutiny. Like portions of the roadway that never seem to get repaired, that remain torn up day after week after month after year. Our life journeys over time can include unrepaired relationships that require us to swerve again and again each time we're reminded of that break, that trust that was never made right. So is it just a hard fact that we can only accept but not change? That whenever the other person refuses to admit their wrongdoing, we're stuck, remaining unhealed? Is there nothing else but to just suck it up and move on? Andrew Elphinstone, an aristocratic English clergyman, provides a different spin on matters of forgiveness and healing in his book, Freedom, Suffering, and Love. He views forgiveness as an anti-evolutionary action, one that flies in the face of all our instincts. Programmed for survival, with life set up so that survivors are rewarded and their particular genetic packages flourish, we naturally return pain for pain, naturally hurt who hurts us, Not because we're mean people, but because our evolutionary programming drives us to do just that. In order to survive, we have to respond to threats by fighting back, taking revenge, inflicting as much or more pain than was inflicted on us. To respond to pain in another way, by not resisting, or even further, extending forgiveness in the absence of any signs of remorse on the part of the offender, is a thoroughly non-evolutionary response. A response that goes against our survival instincts in every way, which might be why it can seem just so wrong or even stupid when we don't fight back. Yet responding by turning the other cheek or extending forgiveness without it being asked of us, that is precisely what may be needed if there is to be evolution on a spiritual level. Spiritual teacher Ram Dass recounts a time when his morning meditation practice included the practice of offering loving kindness to revered teachers such as Jesus, the Buddha, his own guru. And his practice included the challenge of offering that same loving kindness to former Secretary of Defense Caspar Weinberger. While Ram Dass acknowledges that Weinberger was no greater a villain than many others, for him, Weinberger's arrogance and refusal to see a broader vision particularly was infuriating. So after easily and openly offering loving kindness to saints and teachers, Ram Dass would turn to Weinberger. He kept a picture of the man on his altar. And would feel his heart constrict. From this ongoing response, Ram Dass says he recognized not just the limits in his own ability to love, but he could see that in some mysterious way, his refusal to love Weinberger helped keep Weinberger trapped in arrogance. In other words, each time Ram Dass found Weinberger unworthy of kindness, that response confirmed Weinberger in his negative role a bit more. Who's your personal Caspar Weinberger? The person you just cannot regard with any degree of acceptance, the person who makes your heart constrict whenever you think about them. There is a value in having villains among us, people we can easily despise. While I may complain about the undue power of a villain like Weinberger or some contemporary version of Weinberger, and yes, I know we're all thinking about a certain orange-haired person. I also get to feel a kind of power in return when I experience just pure loathing, even hatred.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's that evolutionary force, my hardwiring for aggression, revving me up to fight. Rage, along with love, is a passionate force. They both are rooted in the same energy. And along with the easy villains, like orange-haired politicians, they're the villains who cause me far more personal pain. Those people who've hurt me and never acknowledged it, never apologized, sometimes even insisted it was all my fault. Each time I recall those villains, each time I'm reminded of the pain they inflicted on me, that passionate force is right there. My evolutionary instincts are activated, and by God, I'm ready to fight all over again. To derail such a process, given all the energy that fuels it, is no small matter. My more likely responses are my instinctive ones that return harm for harm, Or I may be able to manage a little bit more civilized response by suppressing my emotion with a more socially acceptable response. I'm particularly good at that tactic, as are most ministers. We become skilled at politely deflecting, denying any anger or frustration or disappointment, opting for rationality, and just floating above the fray. I was fortunate early in my career to have a congregant challenge me on those responses, and noting how smoothly I just psychologized away anything negative. And though that's still my default setting, the insight from that congregant sometimes makes it possible for me to come up with a different response that is both more honest and, surprisingly, more loving. Hurt me once, shame on you. Hurt me twice, shame on me. Elphinstein notes that whenever we do return hurt for hurt, we feel a special kind of satisfaction, a vindication that comes when we follow our evolutionary programming. I teach you a good lesson when I teach you the cost of messing with me. And I'm probably less likely to get messed with the next time. And maybe you too have made a bit of evolutionary progress there in learning not to mess with somebody like me. We have, in our exchange then, made each of our survival more likely, but we haven't made any headway spiritually. Only when I've chosen not to return pain for pain have I put something new into the equation, opened the door for possible spiritual growth. That will cost me something. The words of forgiveness may stick in my throat. I might have to sit on my hands to prevent them from striking out at you. Forgiveness flies in the face of thousands and thousands of years of training for survival. So if I expect I'm going to feel better when I forgive you, despite your not apologizing or showing no remorse, I'm going to be disappointed. If anything, I'm inviting more suffering into my life and depriving myself of the satisfaction of revenge. I've left myself vulnerable to additional hurt. But if I can choose to forgive just that once, I break the cycle and a little bit less pain gets passed on. So if you look across the landscape of your own life this morning, where do you see someone who might still be waiting for an apology from you? The offender never acknowledges wrongdoing, but you forgive anyway. It seems like an absolutely useless transaction, like shouting into the wind. It smells a bit sanctimonious when I righteously bestow forgiveness on you and prove I'm so much a better person than you. Yet those conclusions suggest the process really isn't finished, that healing is not moving from words into action. It's not enough for me to just say all the right words. I have to allow them to settle into my heart, to change my behavior over time, to make sure it helps I'm interacting differently with the offender who keeps going about their merry way unchanged. So much of the time, I simply will not be able to take such a step. Much of the time, my evolutionary programming will prevail, and I'll return the blow you inflicted on me with a blow right back. I'll shout my own harsh words in response to your harsh words. I'll fantasize about revenge and take comfort in those fantasies. But if I can, once in a great while, respond differently, Choose once in a great while to short-circuit that cycle of pain and offer love rather than retribution. I've advanced my own spiritual evolution a bit. I've advanced the overall spiritual evolution of all humanity a bit. In evolutionary terms, Elphinstone suggests that love is the latest addition, arriving only after countless millennia, so that we stand right now just as it's starting to emerge, which is truly hard to believe these days, with wars, polarization, bitterness overflowing on social media. But then evolutionary emergence always is so gradual, and it comes against all the odds. Like the first steps into a new environment, the first sprouting of wings, the first crawling out of the sea onto dry land. This is an evolutionary development that comes with tremendous struggle and tremendous cost. That means we will more than likely find ourselves standing in the midst of ruin again and again before a new creation can be seen rising out of that ruin. Are we up to that challenge? Are we willing to forgive? Do we really mean what we say when we announce to the world that, hey, we're the people who side with love? Is that even a commitment you can make with the villains in your own life, much less all the villains that surround us every day? Choosing against your own evolutionary instincts, taking pain and turning it inside out into love? Can we do that? May it be so. Amen.